Chapter 6, Gross Domestic Product. In this video, we're going to go through the components of GDP. Remember, gross domestic product is the amount of production a country has during a given period of time. And there are only certain things that are accounted, things that have to be newly made, things that are not used, things that are made within the United States, and things that have a market transaction. All of those products that are made and then purchased are then put into one of four categories. So the government has four components to GDP. The first one is consumption spending. These are things in GDP that are bought by consumers. Consumers are households, and this is about 70% of the US economy. Now, I know when you look at the word investment, you might be thinking stocks and bonds, but investment is not stocks and bonds. That would be finance. Investment is spending by businesses. Now, remember, parts and equipment and ingredients that go into making a product are not considered part of investment. Investment are things that the business is going to keep and hold on to in order for them to make more products. So the ingredients are parts that go into something that's going to be sold to a consumer. Those are called intermediate purchases, and those are not an investment. The third category is government purchases. Again, if the government is the final purchaser of the item, governments have to buy things like munitions, and they have to buy desks and computers and all sorts of things for the government to function. And then the fourth one is net exports. Net exports is exports minus imports. Remember, we want to count US exports. These are things made within the United States that we then sell to foreigners. But we want to subtract out imports because imports weren't made in the United States. So they're counted towards some other country's GDP. If you add these four categories together, you get Y. Y is the same thing as GDP or income for our country. So let's talk about each of these separately. Consumption is, again, all of the total spending on things in GDP by households. So this is, again, goods and services. So an example, if we talk about housing costs, some people own their own home and some people rent a house or rent an apartment from somebody else who is their landlord. If you are a renter, every month you pay rent to the landlord, that rent payment counts towards the US's GDP because you're paying your landlord for a good or service. They are taking care of the property and letting you borrow it. But if you own your own home, you're not paying a landlord. Even if you have a mortgage loan through the bank and you have to pay a mortgage bill to the bank every month, the mortgage is not counted towards the US's GDP. However, when the bank buys your house for you and you pay your mortgage loan back over time, the bank is going to charge you interest. And the interest is you paying the bank for a good or service. So your interest payment to the bank would count, just not the principal amount that would be added into your mortgage payment. Now, anything you do to upgrade your house, let's say you own a house and you want to remodel it and you want to buy cabinets, you want to put in new floors, any of the new purchases that you make would be counted in consumer spending. And if you decide to pay a contractor to do the work for you, your payment of a contractor is a payment for a service, which would be under consumption. Remember, investment is not finance. So purchases of things like stocks and bonds or savings are not in the investment category. Investment is spending by firms or businesses on anything that's made in the United States that's not going into a product that is intended for a customer. So the things that are counted in investment are things the business is going to keep and hold on to for long periods of time. Anything that's considered capital stock, machinery, technology, tools, factories, structures work the same way as the mortgages versus rent in the consumer category. So if a business rents an office space in a building, rent payments count. And again, if they decide to purchase a building and remodel it, remodeling costs would count. In addition, remember, we want to count things when they're actually being made, not when they're bought. So sometimes businesses produce a product and they haven't actually sold it to a consumer yet. We call those inventories. If businesses have produced a lot of goods during this measuring period, those are going to be counted as inventory, and that is underneath investment, not consumption. Only if the thing is produced and sold to a consumer would it be under the consumer category. Stocks, bonds, and savings are not ever counted in gross domestic product because these are all forms of savings for the future, not spending. The third category is government purchases. So, just like investment, this is things that the government is spending on that they're going to keep. So, the government again buys desks and copy machines in order to keep the government running. This does not include transfer payments. A lot of the money that our government spends are payments given out to people and businesses. They give people Social Security payments, unemployment benefits, welfare, and businesses get all of these things in terms of subsidies. So, money being transferred from the government's bank account into a person or a business's bank account, we don't want to count the transfer of money and then also the way they spend it. So, if the government decides to give a Social Security payment to a person, and then the person buys groceries with their money, the groceries are going to count under consumption. But we don't want to count the government sending the money and then the person spending it also, because then we'd be double counting the products. The last category is net exports, which is exports minus imports. So we want to count exports because they are American-made products which are purchased by foreigners. And remember, GDP is only counting things made within the borders of our own country. If you add up all four of these, C, I, G, and NX, you get Y. Just to give you kind of a look at the size of the US GDP, this is the US GDP for the Q3 of 2019, and these are in billions. So you can see that the consumption portion of our gross domestic product is by far the largest. Our net exports category is negative because we generally import more than we export. So on a per capita basis and as a percentage of GDP, we do a lot of spending, and consumption is always the largest part of that.